She wipes glasses in a roadside tavern like she has buried her past for good. But Mara Calloway is not just a bartender, she is Shadow 6, a sniper with a record so deadly even hardened soldiers go silent when they hear her name. When a team is ambushed in Mali and asks for her specifically, the story stops being about who she was and becomes about whether she can survive becoming that woman again.
The rocket hit the Black Hawk at 11:47 at night, and Lieutenant Cole Mercer had only 3 seconds to accept that he was going to die. The rotors screamed. The helicopter tumbled. The desert floor came rushing up to meet them. A hard and final impact. 41 of the finest American soldiers were spread across the Iraqi sand. Wagner snipers controlled every high position, and their own ammunition was nearly gone. Mercer grabbed his radio, his mouth tasting of blood. "Command, we are compromised. We have casualties. We need sniper support immediately." Only static came back. Then, a voice as cold as steel cut through. "There is one option. She has been inactive for 6 years. We are not even certain she is alive." Mercer leaned on the broken metal. "Then you had better go find her. Before we go on, if you are enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel and stick around until the end. This story has some turns you will not see coming. Also, drop a comment to tell me what city you are watching from. I am curious how far this story will travel. Now, let us go back to where it all started. 6 weeks after the incident, in Beaumont, Texas. It was a Tuesday evening at the Crossroads Tavern. This was the kind of bar that had absorbed 40 years of spilled drinks and sad stories and never once judged. It was a haven, built by a retired master sergeant named Ray Decker. He was 68 years old and had a bad knee from his service in Fallujah. He had built a sanctuary for people who needed one. The woman working the bar that Tuesday was 22-year-old Mara Calloway. She had long, dark brown hair that flowed past her shoulders. She wore a simple white sports top and military-style camouflage pants with old, worn boots. She had no jewelry, no visible rank, and a history that no one in the tavern knew a thing about. She moved behind the counter with a special kind of awareness. She was constantly watchful, always in the perfect spot, and never stood still for no reason. 4 Marines had lingered well past the final call for alcohol. They were off duty and getting loud. They had consumed enough cheap liquor to believe their worst ideas were their smartest ones. Their apparent leader was Staff Sergeant Victor Rohr, a 31-year-old infantry soldier. He stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and was 240 pounds of solid muscle. He was the sort of man who could never believe that a small woman behind a bar might be the most dangerous person there. He spotted her tattoo when her sleeve moved up as she was wiping down the counter. It was a Navy SEAL trident on her right forearm. The tattoo was expertly done, professional, and looked like it had cost a lot of money. It was the type of ink that told a powerful story if you knew how to read it. Rohr assumed he did. "Well, look at this." His words were slurred by the alcohol, well past the point of sound judgment. "Our little bartender seems to think she is some kind of special operator." Mara did not even look at him. Her cleaning cloth kept making slow, deliberate circles on the wooden bar. Her hands moved with a familiar rhythm, a motion she had performed thousands of times until it was second nature. Rohr's corporal, Dean Fitch, was 26, with a sharp, calculating mind. He got off his stool and walked to the bar. He carefully placed his Sig Sauer handgun on the counter. The overhead light glinted off the polished metal. "Prove it," Fitch said. "Tell me exactly what this is." Mara's eyes moved to the gun for just a single second. It was all the time she needed to see every last detail. "A 9 by 19 millimeter parabellum," she stated, her voice a bit rough. She had the sound of a person who did not talk much and was completely comfortable with silence. "It holds a 17-round magazine and there is carbon residue on the barrel. You have not maintained this firearm in at least 3 weeks. The extractor spring is getting weak. That weapon is likely to jam if you fire it repeatedly." A thick quiet filled the bar. It was the sort of silence that seems to drop the temperature in a room. Fitch's mouth was slightly open. He looked like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. "Lucky guess," he finally managed to say. "Anybody can find gun information online." But his confidence was clearly shaken, and Roar noticed. The large sergeant pushed himself up from his stool. He came over so close that Mara could smell the cheap liquor on his breath. It was the type of alcohol that burns your throat and fuels your anger. He reached across and took hold of her wrist. He squeezed it just firmly enough to send a message without causing any real harm. "Let me see that tattoo a little closer," he demanded. The instant he made contact, the atmosphere in the bar shifted. It was not a big, sudden change, but the air itself felt different. It was like the deep calm just before a major storm breaks. Mara's other hand came up immediately. It was not a fast or aggressive motion, just a simple defensive reflex. It was like the way you automatically blink when something comes at your face. Her weight redistributed. Her left foot slid forward as her right foot moved back. She was now perfectly balanced. Her shoulders squared up. Her breathing did not change at all. The whole sequence took less than a second. Then, just as quickly, she relaxed. She allowed Roar to keep his grip on her wrist, letting him think he was in charge. But Fitch saw the entire thing, and his calculating mind was quickly putting the pieces together. Ray Decker appeared from the back office. He carried a baseball bat in his right hand and had 3 decades of hard-won wisdom in his eyes. "The bar is closed. Marines, now is the time for you to make a wiser decision than the one you are currently making." Roar did not even turn to look at him. "Stay out of this, old man. This is about this girl and her stolen honor." Decker placed the bat on the counter and left it there. He just stood, a 68-year-old man with a painful knee and a voice that held more experience than these young men could ever know. And when he spoke the next time, his voice had a quiet strength. "Son, you have no clue the kind of problem you have just stepped into. This is your final opportunity to leave this place with your pride intact." Lance Corporal Ty Bolan, who was standing by the door, just chuckled. The old guy has some spirit. It is a shame that being outnumbered makes courage worthless. Mara had continued to clean during the entire exchange. Her cloth was still moving in those same steady circles. But if you were paying attention, and Fitch was now paying very close attention, you would have noticed. She never let any of them get behind her. She never kept her hands occupied for more than a second. She consistently maintained at least 2 obvious paths for an exit. These were not the habits of a person who serves drinks. These were the reflexes of someone who had survived in hostile environments where awareness was the only thing that kept you alive. Roar's patience finally broke. He tightened his hold on her wrist, pulling her forward so hard that she tripped against the bar. His other hand grabbed her sleeve and pulled it hard. The old fabric tore with a loud, distinct ripping sound, and the entire bar fell completely silent. The full tattoo sleeve on Mara's right arm was now visible under the bar lights. This was not just a collection of pretty pictures. This was the story of her service. The Navy SEAL trident was the centerpiece on her upper forearm. It was inked with such stunning detail that it was obvious the artist understood its significance. But it was the text surrounding the trident that took the breath from everyone in the room. Shadow 6, DevGru Gold, K2, 203, Wounded in Action 6. Below that was a list of deployments and dates. Mosul 2019, Kandahar 2020 to 2021, Eastern Syria 2022, Operation Iron Veil 2023, and then there were the scars. The ripped sleeve revealed all of them. A circular bullet wound near her collarbone, a pattern of shrapnel marks across her ribs, a long, straight knife wound on her left shoulder. Every single mark was a testament. Every scar was a price she had already paid. Roar let go of her wrist like he had touched a live wire. The silence that followed was not just an absence of noise. It was the sound of a room trying to understand something that made no sense just a minute before. It was a reality too large to grasp. Fitch's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. He accessed a restricted military personnel file that his position allowed him to use. He typed something in. He stared at the screen. Then he looked at it again. His face went white. Calloway. M, he said. But his voice was barely a whisper. Petty Officer First Class, SEAL Team 8. On active duty from 2019 to now. Status. He stopped. He read the line one last time. Status is classified. The majority of her record is sealed. Access demands top-secret security clearance. Corporal Boland, who was still by the door, said absolutely nothing. He no longer seemed to be guarding an exit. He looked like a man who was desperate to escape through it. Private Marcus Neal, the 21-year-old rookie, was frozen against the far wall. He had the expression of someone who just realized he had stumbled into the very worst kind of situation. Roar was stunned into silence. He could only stare at the tattoo. He was seeing something that did not fit into any category he understood. It was Fitch who finally shattered the quiet. His voice was unsteady, with all his previous arrogance completely gone. 203 confirmed kills, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the book. The longest shot ever confirmed. 2,619 meters. He looked up from the page. That is over 1.5 miles in a sandstorm, using a damaged scope. The entire bar fell silent. Just then, Mara's military-grade phone lit up on the counter with a new message. The screen displayed a black trident on a gray shield. It was a secure communication channel, the kind you cannot buy. It would never appear on a normal phone without a special clearance that nobody in that bar possessed. She read the message in 2 seconds, erased it, and placed the phone face down. But Decker had noticed the symbol. He had lived his whole life studying people and situations that were designed to fool him. He did not need every detail to understand the full picture. The pieces of the puzzle instantly connected in his mind. It was the calm certainty of a 68-year-old man who had learned from a world that taught its lessons the hard way. Roar finally found his voice, but it was different now. It sounded much weaker. The tattoo, he started. We just thought you were... We never knew you were actually... No, Mara interrupted him. Her voice was level, showing no anger or contempt. She sounded like someone who had been wrongly judged so often it no longer bothered her. You did not. She looked him directly in the eyes for the first time since he had arrived. Her green eyes were steady and unreadable. They contained something that Roar would later spend many sleepless nights attempting to figure out. Most people do not, she said. That is the entire point. Decker stepped out from behind the bar. His bad knee caused him to favor his right side, as it always did. He walked to a picture hanging on the wall. The frame was so ancient that the glass had scratches in the corners. He gently lifted it down. Ramadi, Iraq, 2004, he announced. The photo showed a group of Marines. Their faces were etched with heat, fatigue, and the immense pressure felt by men who had witnessed things they could never forget. They were standing in front of a ruined convoy, as thick smoke billowed into a sky the color of a fresh bruise. To the side, slightly separated from the group, stood a single figure in desert camouflage. The individual's face was digitally blurred for security, and they held a sniper rifle like it was a natural extension of their arm. Decker set the photograph down on the bar. His weathered hand rested on the blurred figure. I was a staff sergeant, he explained, his voice now softer than any other sound in the room. My squad got pinned down while clearing a neighborhood. Insurgents held the rooftops, 11 of them. We had no cover, no air support, and no way to escape. He tapped the photo. One sniper kept us safe from those rooftops for 9 hours. 91 confirmed kills. That sniper saved every single one of my men. He looked at Mara, and his eyes shared a story he had held on to for 18 years. waiting for this exact moment. Her call sign was Shadow 1. Her real name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Dana Calloway. He paused for a moment. She was your mother. No one in the bar took a breath. Without realizing it, Mara's hand moved to her own forearm. Her fingers followed the numbers tattooed on her skin. 203. 203 faces that would appear in her mind at 3 in the morning, long after the drinks had faded and sleep refused to come. She never came home, Mara said. Her voice was steady, hardened by 6 years of practice, killed in action. Ramadi, 2004. 3 months before I was born. She stared at the countertop. She examined the patterns in the wood as if it were the only thing in the tavern that would not judge her. I never had the chance to hear her voice or to meet her. I just inherited her call sign, her service history, and the pressure of trying to live up to her legacy. Decker rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. He remained silent, simply offering his support. And in that moment, in the quiet of Crossroads Tavern, a humble bar in Beaumont, Texas, on a Tuesday evening, 4 Marines were frozen in place. They had entered with firm beliefs about the world, but they were now learning it was far more complicated than they could have known. Roar looked from the photograph to Mara, and then down at the tattoo on her arm. His sergeant's stripes suddenly seemed to be made of a much lesser material than they had been just 4 hours earlier. He tried to speak, then stopped, and then tried again. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said quietly. The single word was filled with everything he now understood, and it could not take back anything he had done. "I do not know what to say." Mara grabbed a cleaning rag. Her hands began to wipe the bar in smooth, automatic circles. It was a familiar motion from a past life taking control, while the rest of her was completely still. "I know," she answered. "That is where learning starts." The quiet was soon broken. The door to the Crossroads Tavern was thrown open with a loud crash. Nearly everyone in the bar instinctively reached for a weapon, but not Mara. She simply adjusted her stance slightly and faced the new danger. Her body moved with the reflexes of a person who had never mentally left the war zone. 2 figures walked in. The first was a woman in regular clothes, just jeans and a dark jacket, but she carried herself with a sense of command that had nothing to do with her attire. The second was a man in a full navy dress uniform. His uniform was so covered in medals that the ribbons alone told a 30-year history of service in the most hostile places on Earth. Commander Priya Okafor, 44 years old, moved like someone who regularly made life and death choices and had learned to live with that responsibility. Following her was Captain James Thorne. At 53, he wore a seal trident on his uniform, which looked less like a decoration and more like a piece of functional equipment. Both he and the commander looked directly at Mara. Then, in perfect sync, they both raised their hands in a full military salute. This was not a simple greeting between soldiers. It was a gesture of deep respect, one that is only given to someone whose achievements are almost beyond belief. Mara's posture immediately straightened. Her own hand came up to return the salute automatically, ignoring her torn shirt and the stunned Marines. For that single moment, the bartender disappeared. Everyone in the room saw the warrior she truly was. Roar and Fitch could only stare. Bull and Neil appeared to have stopped breathing altogether. Commander Okafor's voice was official when she spoke. Petty Officer Calloway. Her eyes, however, scanned the torn shirt and the 4 men with a silent, burning anger. She was taking in the entire situation. "We received your emergency beacon," she stated. Mara glanced at her encrypted phone on the bar. The signal had been sent the moment Roar grabbed her. It was an instinct developed over 6 years in the field, where backup was either a single call away or it never arrived at all. "I am retired, Commander," Mara replied. "People like you are never truly retired," Thorne corrected her. His voice carried the weight of a man who knew that fact from his own experience. They just take exceptionally long breaks. The 4 Marines were now standing perfectly straight at attention, Their military discipline had taken over, pushing through the shock and the alcohol, which is the entire point of training. You do not relax when senior officers like this walk into a room. You do not offer excuses. You simply stand tall and wait for what is coming. Okafor's eyes moved over them like a targeting system, analyzing each of them. Would any of you care to explain to me why 4 United States Marines are threatening a decorated SEAL veteran in a public establishment? Roar's voice was tight. Ma'am, we did not know. The tattoo, it seemed like we assumed she was. You assumed a woman who weighs 130 pounds could not possibly be a member of Special Operations, Okafor said, cutting him short. You saw what you wanted to see, not what was standing right before you. You allowed your biases and the alcohol to make decisions that your training should have prevented. She pulled out a tablet and swiped the screen with a practiced hand. The screen showed classified documents. Most of the information was hidden by black bars, but there was enough visible to reveal a story that no one in that room was prepared to hear. Calloway, Mara, Elena. Petty Officer, First Class, SEAL Team 8. Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL, Class 311, graduated 2019. The first woman to complete the training in the Classified Integration Initiative. Navy Cross, classified. Silver Star, classified. Okafor's voice was calm and deliberate. 203 confirmed kills across 5 deployments. The longest confirmed shot in history at 2,619 meters. That is 1.6 miles. In a sandstorm, with a damaged scope, while she was injured, the room was now completely still. It was the type of silence that happens when people understand that the distance between what they believed and what was real was not just a small space, but a massive, uncrossable chasm. Thorns stepped forward. Operation Iron Veil, Eastern Syria, last year. 39 operators were extracted alive. There were 0 casualties on that mission. She held the overwatch position for 19 hours alone after her spotter was killed. Mara's jaw tightened. She never thought that operation would be mentioned in a bar in Beaumont, Texas. The brief show of emotion on her face disappeared in less than 2 seconds as she regained her composure. All the color vanished from Fitch's face. Bolan just stared at the floor. Neil examined his own hands like they were foreign objects, while Roar's fingers crept toward the sergeant's stripes on his uniform. Ma'am, I will turn myself in to my commanding officer in the morning for attacking a veteran, for conduct unbecoming of a Marine. I will accept any consequences. Hold on. Mara's voice was steady. It was never forceful. It carried the authority of someone used to giving orders where a single mistake could be fatal. Roar's hand stopped. You made a mistake. Your pride and the liquor made your decisions for you. Those are failures of judgment, not of your character. You can learn from this moment. She moved from behind the bar with a controlled grace Fitch had observed all evening. There was a clear purpose in every single step. She came to a stop in front of Roar, looking up at the man who towered over her. Just 2 hours ago, he was certain his size was the only thing that mattered. She took a challenge coin from her pocket, its features worn smooth from being held for years. A Navy SEAL trident decorated one side. The other side bore an inscription for people who carry burdens others cannot. It was signed by Admiral William H. McRaven. He presented this to me after a covert operation in a nation I was never officially in, for actions that will never be public record. She offered the coin to him. He showed me that the greatest lesson for a warrior is not how to fight. It is learning what is truly worth protecting. Roar gazed at the coin as if it might explode. Ma'am, I am not worthy to hold this. Not yet, Mara said in agreement, but perhaps one day you will be. There will be a time when you have to decide between your own ego and someone else's well-being. You will need to choose between what you expect and what is real. When that time comes, I want you to remember what happened tonight. She pressed the coin into his hand. Remember that the most capable person in this room was a 22-year-old bartender who chose to serve drinks instead of destruction, and you almost failed to see it. Roar's fingers closed tightly around the coin. He struggled to swallow. He said nothing because there were no words that could possibly be enough. And somewhere beneath the alcohol in his bruised ego, he understood that. Okafor stepped forward then, cutting off Mara's path. Her entire demeanor shifted. The professional authority was still present, but it was now mixed with something else. It was a profound sense of urgency. The kind of urgency you see in someone who has critical information that needs to be shared immediately. We need to talk about the real reason we are here. She held up the tablet screen. It showed satellite images of a desert area circled in red. 11 distinct positions were marked, with interlocking fields of fire. This was taken 68 hours ago. A SEAL Team 6 squad was ambushed in northern Mali during a hostage rescue. The intelligence they received was a setup. They were drawn into a perfectly laid trap. 4 operators were killed in the first hour. The surviving 37 are pinned down inside an old structure. Their ammunition supply is at 12% and dropping fast. Mara took in the image. She had not meant to begin strategizing, but her mind started the process on its own. It was as natural as breathing, a skill honed over 6 years of intense training. She calculated distance, elevation, wind speed, and lines of attack. 9 expert marksmen, Thorne added. Former Russian, former British, and 2 ex-American contractors with a grudge that makes them extremely dangerous. They are equipped with thermal optics, they have each other's positions covered, and they are eliminating members of Team 6 one by one. How much longer do they have? Mara asked. 5 hours, Thorne replied. After that, enemy forces will have them completely surrounded. An extraction will become impossible, regardless of the air support we provide. He handed her his satellite phone. A text message was displayed on the screen. She read it quickly. The last sentence hit her with force. Requesting immediate counter-sniper support. 9 hostile positions. The required shots are beyond standard capability. Requesting Shadow 6 specifically, if she is available. She looked up from the device. They are using my call sign. Because these shots, Okafor said softly, are not just hard, Mara. They are impossible for anyone else. We have alternative strategies. We do. But those strategies are not going to be enough for what must be done on that ridge. The 4 Marines had not budged. They stood rigidly, listening to a conversation that was completely reshaping their view of the woman they had underestimated all night. Fitch looked at his own handgun on the bar. The firearm Mara had analyzed in an instant, like a page from a book she had memorized. An emotion he could not yet name appeared on his face. Mara set the satellite phone down. Her eyes landed on the photograph still sitting on the bar. It was a picture of her mother, her face obscured behind a rifle that looked like an extension of her own body. Ramadi, 2004. 14 men were still alive because a single woman held 9 rooftops for 9 straight hours and never once considered giving up. She glanced at Decker. The old man met her gaze. He did not try to influence her or pass judgment. He was just being the man he had been for the last 6 years. He was the only person who never asked for anything more than an honest day of work, trusting that things would be all right. I made a promise to myself that I was done, she said. Her words meant only for him. I am aware of that, Decker answered. I promised after Kandahar, after the hearing, after I walked away from all of it. I told myself that Mara Calloway was who I really was, and Shadow 6 was just a part I used to play. I know that too, Decker said. His tone was even and calm, with no hint of trying to sway her choice. But there are 37 people in Mali who asked for you, not because you are the only operator they could find. It is because you are the only one who can make those shots. Mara remained silent. The quiet between them was heavy with the weight of her decision. Then, Roar's voice came from behind her. It sounded completely different from how it had earlier. It was now clear and direct. Ma'am, I can't imagine what you went through, what you still carry, or what it cost you to leave that life behind." He paused for a breath. "But I can say this. If my team asked for someone by name, I would pray that a person like you was on the way." Mara did not turn. She kept her hands flat on the bar, her eyes fixed on the image of the woman she had never met. That woman defended rooftops for 9 hours in Ramadi, so 14 men could go home to their loved ones. She reached down below the bar and brought up a rifle case. She set it on the counter, unlatched it, and gazed at the Accuracy International AXMC in 338 Lapua Magnum. For 6 years, it had been the most reliable thing in her world. It was the one thing that never let her down as long as she maintained it. She turned to Okafor. "I am going to need transportation, updated weather conditions for the landing zone in Mali, and 30 minutes with the satellite imagery before we depart." She picked up the rifle and checked the action with the smooth, familiar motion of 10,000 repetitions. 37 people asked for Shadow 6. Her voice was level and definite, entirely without emotion. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision and was already looking ahead. "Shadow 6 is on the way." The C-130 aircraft climbed into the Texas night. Its engines produced a constant drone, and its cargo area contained one asset that was not listed on any official manifest. Mara sat by herself, a rifle across her lap, wrapped in the quiet of a person living with the consequences of her choice. 6 years. For 6 years she had wiped down a bar in slow, methodical circles. For 6 years she had told herself that Mara Calloway was the real person, and Shadow 6 was just an old identity. The story had been convincing enough until this evening. But now, the rifle was back in her hands. Its familiar weight felt less like a burden and more like a missing piece of herself had finally returned. Commander Okafor sat across from her with a tablet, maintaining the professional calm of someone accustomed to sending people into harm's way. Captain Thorne was by the cargo ramp on a satellite phone, coordinating support that Mara would never see but would depend on for her survival over the next 18 hours. Mara inspected her rifle by feel alone. She performed this check so many times that her fingers knew the process like a musician knows a well-practiced song. It was pure muscle memory, ingrained in her through countless hours of practice. Okafor looked up from her tablet. "Tell me what happened on the Iron Veil mission." Mara's hands paused their work on the rifle's bolt. "That operation is classified. I was the one who filed the after-action report," Okafor stated. "I have read the official version. What I do not know is what you brought back with you, or what you are taking on this flight." The cargo bay was chilly, and Mara looked at the woman who was once her commanding officer. She understood this was not a casual inquiry. Okafor was conducting her standard pre-mission check, making certain her operative was prepared for a task where any failure would be catastrophic. Mara stared into the middle distance. The location was Kandahar. The year was 2022. She had learned a long time ago that looking away from the memory only gave it more power. My spotter was Chief Petty Officer Chae-Wan Lim. He was the best I had ever worked with at reading the wind. He could judge distance by eye to within 3 meters at 1,000 yards. His absolute calm could make you feel confident, even when everything was going wrong. Okafor let the silence hang, an expert at waiting patiently. Mara went on. 2 hours into the mission, he was hit by a 7.62 round in the left lung. I could hear the air hissing out of the wound every time he tried to breathe, and that left me with a choice. Her hands resumed their precise, systematic check of the weapon. I could cease fire and attempt to save his life, but our unit was pinned down in the valley below. Without my covering fire, they would be overrun in just a few minutes. All 39 of them. The drone of the engines seemed to get louder in the quiet. Or I could continue to fire, protect my unit, and let Chae-Wan die right next to me. She recounted the events without any visible emotion, the words worn smooth by being replayed in her own mind in the dead of night. I was on that mission, and Chae-Wan was my spotter. He had a terrible wound in his chest and his lung had collapsed, but he kept giving me updates. The wind was 4 miles per hour from the northwest. The target was at 041. The range was 1,900 meters. Just one click to your right. Okafor remained silent. He died after 5 hours, right in the middle of a sentence. He was reporting a wind change and then there was nothing, like a light was turned off. Mara stared straight at Okafor. I kept shooting for 14 more hours. During the 11th hour, my shoulder dislocated. I just moved the rifle to my left hand and continued. When they finally reached us, they had to pry the gun from my grip. I could not let it go. She paused for a moment to breathe. I thought if I held on tight enough, I could undo what had happened. Okafor then said, "And after that, they ordered you to engage again." Mara's face became stern. We went back to our base. Command offered me congratulations and then told me a Taliban unit was moving in the area. There were 60 of them, completely exposed. They told me to attack. She set a piece of her rifle down on the table. I got into position. I could see every single one of them perfectly, but my finger would not pull the trigger. They were in retreat. The battle was finished. They were not a threat to anyone anymore, and I could only hear Chewan's voice, his last unfinished words. "The wind is changing, too." She stopped for a second. "I got on the radio and told command I would not do it. And that is when you were court-martialed," Okafor stated. "For insubordination and refusing a direct order, they wanted to make an example out of me. The charges were dropped after 39 operators from SEAL Team 8 testified for me. It turns out the people you protect really want to protect you in return." She took hold of the rifle once more, but command got their message across. "Either resign, or we will make your life a living hell." She looked down at the gun. So I left. I became Mara Calloway, just a bartender, telling myself that was all I wanted to be. "These 9 snipers in Mali are not retreating," Okafor said. "They are killing American soldiers at this very moment. With every minute that passes, Team 6 is losing more territory." "I understand that," Mara said. "I need Shadow 6 for this mission, not Mara Calloway arguing with herself from 2,000 meters away." "Then she is yours," Mara declared, her voice firm and final. At that moment, Thorne approached with a satellite phone. He had the expression of a man who was about to share terrible news. "The Mali situation has gotten worse. Team 6 is down to 9% of their ammunition. We have 5 confirmed dead, 11 wounded, and only 32 soldiers are still able to fight." He presented new images to her on his tablet computer. "The enemy has more soldiers. There are now 12 snipers. 3 more than we initially thought." He indicated a photo on the display. "This man is our biggest issue. Alexander Pota, a former agent of the FSB. He has 31 years of experience and maybe 70 confirmed kills. He is in charge of their sniper team, and he is extremely skilled." Mara studied the pictures with sharp focus, not just seeing images but decoding a difficult puzzle. She observed the compound, the 12 enemy locations, and how their lines of fire overlapped. An expert had planned this. "The best place to land is 3 kilometers to the south," she commented. "From that ridge, I will be able to see 7 of the 12 enemy spots." She drew lines on the display. "The other 5 are located inside buildings. There is no direct line of sight, which means I will have to be on the move while they are firing at me." Thorne started to say, "The official field manual states, I am not following the manual," Mara interrupted, enlarging the building schematics. "Buildings are made with windows. Windows create openings, and a bullet can travel right through an opening." She traced a path that went through 3 buildings, 4 sheets of glass, and 2 areas with different temperatures. The target was inside a secure room without any direct view from the outside. "That is target 8, she said. "My bullet will go through this window, continue down the hallway, and exit through that window. It will fly across the open area, enter the second building at this point, and pass through the office to his location. 1 bullet, 4 windows, From 2,400 meters. Thorne just stared, unable to speak. That shot is completely impossible, he finally managed to say. Mara paid him no attention. Target 10 is located in a basement. There is no way to see him, but there is a ventilation shaft on the roof. If I shoot a round into that shaft at a 31-degree angle, it will hit the duct wall, change its path, hit it again, and fall right down on top of him. Thorne looked back and forth between Okafor and Mara. A bullet that ricochets twice and still has the power to be deadly, Thorne said in a low voice. The laws of physics say that it is not possible, Mara conceded. I am going to do it anyway. As the aircraft began its descent, Mara took something out of her bag. It was an item she had owned for 6 years but had never found the courage to open. It was an envelope that was sealed and yellowed from time. The handwriting on it was faint, but you could still make out the words, "To my daughter, in case I do not return home." Okafor stopped moving. Decker gave this to me 2 years after I opened the bar, Mara explained quietly. She gave it to him in Ramadi, 3 weeks before she died. She asked him to locate me someday and deliver it. Mara flipped the letter over in her hands. I have been holding this for 6 years without opening it. Reading it would make her death feel too final, and I was not prepared for that. She looked at Okafor with complete vulnerability. But if I am going to become Shadow 6 again, if I will be adding 12 more names to the 203 I am already responsible for, then I have to know what she needed me to know. Her fingers tore the seal. The paper on the inside was old and delicate. The ink had faded, but the message was easy to read, and it hit Mara right in her soul. My dearest child, if you are seeing this, it means I did not make it back to you. I am composing this from a base in Ramadi before I go on my next assignment. Being a shadow is not about the body count. It is about understanding when it is time to stop counting. I secured 9 rooftops today for 9 hours. I had 91 confirmed kills. In the 10th hour, Command insisted I continue shooting at men who were trying to escape with their wounded. They were not fighting anymore. They were no longer a danger. I allowed them to live. Command was furious. But those men were other people's sons and fathers. To kill them would have been murder. It would not have been war. If you decide to become a warrior, and I believe you will, always remember this. The most difficult shot you will ever have to make is the one you decide not to take. That is the thing that makes us soldiers, not simple executioners. I love you. I am so sorry I am not able to be there to teach you this lesson in person, Mom. Mara's hands were shaking just enough for it to be noticeable. She knew, Mara whispered. The very same decision, the very same challenge. Ramadi in 2004, Kandahar in 2022. She experienced it 18 years before I did, and she left the answer for me. Okafor did not say a word. There are some moments that do not require any words. Mara neatly folded the letter and tucked it inside her vest, right over her heart. When she raised her head, her expression was different. It was not a look of peace, but something closer to conviction. The quiet confidence of someone who has finally accepted who they truly are. These 12 men in Mali are a danger. They are not pulling back. They are actively killing Americans right now. She got to her feet and went to her gear with a practiced, smooth movement. My mother explained the difference between a real battle and an execution to me before I even knew my alphabet. And I am certain which one this is. She was about to grab her equipment case when Decker's voice came through her secure phone. It was a line used only for absolute emergencies, and the call sounded extremely urgent. Kate, he said. He only ever called her that when everything was at stake, and she froze in place. Hold on, Garrison. I am departing in 20 minutes. I am aware of that. That is the reason for my call, he replied. His voice carried a strain she had never heard from him in all their years. It was the sound of a man finally sharing a secret he had kept for a long time. Your mother gave me something else for you back in Ramadi, he explained. It was not only the letter. Mara stood there and waited silently. 2 days before she was killed, Dana left a message with me for you. She told me, "If my little girl grows up to be a warrior, you must teach her that saying no is the most courageous act she can perform." He took a breath, his voice becoming softer. She was certain she was not coming home, Mara. She wanted you to have a choice that she was never given. That is the reason I am giving you that exact choice right now. You are free to walk away from this. Nobody will hold it against you. But Mara just shook her head. If I do not go, another person will have to, and they will not be able to make those shots. Then 32 of our people will die in Mali, all because I wanted to be left in peace. Or it is possible someone else goes and succeeds, and everyone lives. Then you can simply go back to being Mara Calloway, without 12 new ghosts to haunt you at 3 o'clock in the morning. She glanced at the airplanes, the firearms, the equipment. It was all a part of a past life she had worked so hard to leave behind. But it was now a part of her very being. I have to go, she said. This is my decision, not my obligation. There is a huge difference. Garrison was quiet on the other end for a long time. I will be right here when you return, he finally promised. I will be your safety net. But if anything should go wrong, nothing is going to go wrong, he stated with complete conviction. You are the daughter of Dana Calloway. Shadows do not go down without a fight. Mara almost let a smile show. Just watch over the bar for me. You watch over yourself first. She put her phone back in her pocket. For 3 long seconds, she was completely still, with her eyes shut. She held her parents' dog tags tightly against her chest, which were concealed under her flight suit. Then her eyes opened. She grabbed her rifle, and she walked to the loading ramp. The jump from 30,000 feet was nothing but pure silence and immense speed. The desert landscape below was a dark quilt of blackness and twinkling starlight. And down there in that darkness, 32 soldiers were holding on, trusting that someone was on their way to save them. She hit the ground in a dry riverbed 3 kilometers to the south and was moving in less than a minute. The careful trek to the ridge took a full 90 minutes. With a small shovel, she carved out her position and arranged her ammunition. The entire process was as instinctive to her as taking a breath. Her mother's dog tags rested next to her rifle. Dana Calloway, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Shadow 1. As the sun crept over Mali, her scope painted a perfectly clear picture. Her first target, a sniper in an old grain silo, was 1,842 meters out. She could only see the faint glint from his scope. This shot is for you, Mom, she thought. Then she squeezed the trigger. The man went down, and she was already chambering the next round. Her second target was on the run at 2,190 meters. He was scrambling for new cover after hearing the first shot. She led him perfectly, calculating the bullet's flight time. She fired again, this time for the 32 teammates who were still alive. Target 3 was trying to locate her muzzle flash. She sent a round through a 6-inch opening in his cover from 2,441 meters away. He never completed his search. Enemy rounds started kicking up dirt 2 meters to her left. They were zeroing in. She shifted just 6 inches to her right and continued her work. With the 7th shot, the enemy commander fell. She knew he was down because the chatter on the enemy radio turned to chaos. Without their leader, they were just disorganized individuals, not a unified force. She could handle individual problems. But just then, her shoulder failed her. It was an old injury she sustained in Kandahar. The recoil from 7 powerful shots had been too much for the damaged joint. A burst of blinding pain tore through her, and her right arm went completely limp. She took a single, sharp breath and mastered the pain. A mortar shell exploded just 14 meters from her position. She could hear Chaiwan's voice in her head from that terrible day in Kandahar. It was the exact same injury. He had been so steady. Use your left hand, Mara. You have done this before. You can do it again. She reached across her body with her good arm and grabbed her right wrist. With controlled power, she slammed her shoulder against a large rock. The joint snapped back into its socket with a crack she could feel in her jaw. The pain was indescribable. She switched the rifle to her left shoulder and began again. Target 8 was 2,412 meters away. It took 6 agonizing minutes of left-handed calculations as mortars landed closer and closer. She fired. The bullet flew for 3 seconds, passing through 4 windows, 3 rooms, and a tiny crack in a wall that seemed impossible to hit. The target collapsed. That made 8 down. Numbers 9 and 10 were next. She kept firing left-handed as her shoulder ballooned and her fingers seized up. Every single shot was a complex physics equation with no simple answer. The 10th target was hiding in a basement. She found an opening through a ventilation shaft. After 9 minutes of careful calculation, she fired from 2,744 meters. The enemy radio went completely silent. That was her confirmation. 11 down, with only 1 left. Alexander Pota himself. He was a former professional with 31 years of service. He was hiding inside a concrete bunker with only a 7-centimeter viewing slit. The distance was 2,847 meters. She prepared for the shot with meticulous care. She accounted for the wind, the temperature, the humidity, and even the rotation of the earth. She adjusted the scope with her left hand. Each click was a tiny correction for a shot that was nearly 3 kilometers long. She clutched her mother's dog tags in her left hand, feeling the cold, smooth metal. "This one is for you," she whispered. She found that quiet moment between her heartbeats. And then she fired. 5.2 seconds later, the bullet passed cleanly through that 7-centimeter gap. Alexander Pota had no idea what happened. Her radio came to life with voices. "All snipers are eliminated. Shadow 6, you are clear to evacuate. Team 6 is moving." 32 soldiers were sprinting toward the rescue helicopters. She watched them through her scope. They moved with the skill of true professionals, always covering one another. Every single one of them made it safely to the choppers. Not one person was lost during the extraction. The immense weight of her actions settled upon her. She now had 12 new ghosts to add to her personal list. She knew she would eventually learn all of their names. That was the price she always had to pay. Her own helicopter arrived 40 minutes later. She made a run for it, left-handed, as bullets zipped past her head. Strong hands pulled her inside as the helicopter banked hard, avoiding a rocket. "Everyone is safe," the pilot called out. Mission accomplished. Mara sat down, her rifle across her lap, her shoulder a burning knot of pain. A young Navy medic gently took her arm. "This is going to hurt," he said. She felt a laugh wanting to escape. The pain had started years ago in Kandahar and had never truly disappeared. A little more pain was nothing new to her. She looked out the door at the desert, shrinking away below. 12 enemies were gone. 32 allies were alive and on their way home. A letter from her mother was tucked inside her suit. She could feel its presence with every breath she took. The words came back to her from 18 years ago. "The hardest shot is the one you do not take." She had taken 12 shots tonight, but she had not taken that single shot in Kandahar. Now, she finally understood. Both decisions came from the same lesson her mother was never able to teach her in person. She understood the fine line between being a soldier and being a killer. It was a line that made the job endurable and made restraint possible. It was the very thing that made her Shadow 6, not just another person holding a rifle. She tucked the dog tags back inside her suit. She felt the worn metal against the old scar on her collarbone, one legacy touching another. The flight home was 19 hours long. Mara slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes when a body is pushed far past its normal limits. It was not true rest, but a mandatory shutdown. And in her dreams, she saw Chan, not the 12 men from Mali. The specifics would come later, after the numbers were given names, faces, and the heavy weight of a human life, especially Chiwan. She could still see the look he gave her in that fifth hour, right as the light left his eyes. The wind shifted, and then there was only silence. Just the desert, her rifle, and 18 more hours of work ahead. She woke up as the plane descended into Beaumont, feeling completely adrift. It was a strange sensation for someone who had ended 12 lives just 2 days ago and was now going to a bar to clean glasses. Ray Decker was on the tarmac, leaning against his simple truck, his bad knee bothering him. He had the stillness of a man who had waited a very long time, because leaving just was not an option. He watched her walk down the ramp, her arm in a sling, her gear in her good hand. His face showed a storm of emotions before it finally settled. He gave her a careful hug, the kind that avoids all the injured spots. "You came back," he said quietly. "I promised I would." He held on for just a moment longer than he needed to, and she let him. For 18 years, Decker had held on to her mother's dog tags, waiting for a daughter who did not even know to ask for them. He had earned that extra second. 32 saved, she reported after he let go. 12 down. The family business goes on. She said it as a simple fact, with no drama or feeling. "The family business goes on," he repeated. Then he asked softly, "How is the shoulder?" Corman patched it up. "It will need surgery eventually. For right now, it is just a very expensive pain." Decker nodded like that was the most ordinary answer in the world. He opened the truck door for her, and they began the drive toward Beaumont. The Texas morning felt almost painfully normal. The sky was a perfect blue. Traffic was almost non-existent, and a country song about coming home played on the radio. Mara just stared out the window, feeling the huge gap between the world she had just left and the one flying by at 60 miles an hour. "I cannot stop thinking about Pod," she said after a long, quiet spell. She had not planned on saying it, but the words just came out. He was a decorated man. Alexander Pod, 31 years of service, 60 confirmed kills. She wondered if he had a daughter, if some little girl would now spend 20 years putting together a father from medals and classified files, just like she had with her mother. Probably. Decker's response was, as usual, completely honest. There was no gentle lead-in, no attempt to soften the reality. The truth just hung there, between them in the truck. Mara's breath caught for a moment before she got it back under control. "How do you live with it?" "I do not live with it," Decker said. "I live because of it. 14 people got to go home to their families in 2004 because your mother cleared those rooftops. 32 people are going home this week because you held that ridge. That is not guilt. That is purpose. There is a very big difference." They pulled up to the Crossroads Tavern, and Mara spotted them before she even opened her door. 4 men stood outside in civilian clothes, but they carried themselves like soldiers. It was a posture that was so deeply learned it had become their natural way of standing. Roar, Fitch, Bolan, and Neil. She got out of the truck, wincing as her body complained about every small movement. All 4 men snapped to attention and gave a full, formal salute. It was a gesture filled with the heavy understanding of what they now knew. "We were wrong," Roar said. His voice was completely changed from 2 nights before, with none of its drunken arrogance. It was now just simple and sincere. "Everything we thought, everything we said about you, it was all wrong, and we are sorry. We know that saying sorry is not enough, but it is all we have to offer." "I know," Mara said back. She looked at every man in the room. "And you are here today. That means more than you will ever know." She walked toward the door but then stopped. Some things needed to be said, and she was too weary to carry them anymore. "First lesson," she said. "Respect is earned by what you do, not by how you appear. You proved you know that by being here, instead of staying on base and hoping I would go away. This is your beginning." She glanced at Fitch, who seemed like he had been thinking for 48 straight hours. Second lesson. You do not measure a warrior by how many people they have killed. You measure them by knowing when a kill is right and when it is just wrong. That one idea separates a soldier from a murderer. My mother wrote that in a note from Ramani in 2004. I read it on an airplane just 2 nights ago. It has taken 2 wars and 18 years for me to finally see her point. Neil, the youngest at 21, spoke. He looked like a man whose reasons for joining up felt very far away. "What is the third lesson?" he asked softly. Mara watched him for a moment. He seemed like someone about to learn a very hard truth. 2 days ago, I took 12 lives, she said plainly. I shot them from so far away that they never saw me. I made shots that should not be possible, and in doing so, I saved 32 other people. She let her words settle in the quiet room. Tonight, I will see all 12 of them in my dreams. I will think of their families. Their faces will join the 203 others that I see at 3 in the morning. She opened the door. That is the cost of being Shadow 6. That is the lesson you seek. The skill is not the difficult part. The weight is what you carry for your entire life. She looked at them one last time. Do you still want this lesson? The 4 Marines looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. Roar spoke for all of them. Yes, ma'am. Good. Tomorrow, you will learn how to clean a rifle properly. Because if you cannot take care of your weapon, everything else is just talk. She went inside. Behind the bar, her hands began to move on their own. She took a glass and a rag, wiping in the same methodical way she had for 6 years. The movement was the total opposite of her other life, but it felt the same. It was about being precise, patient, and doing it over and over. It was about finishing the job. The glass trembled in her grasp. She set it down and looked at her own fingers. In Mali, these fingers sent a bullet through a 7-centimeter space from 2,847 meters away. She did it with her left hand, her shoulder out of place, while under attack. Her hands were perfectly still for all 12 shots, but now, in a quiet bar in Texas, they were shaking. She gripped the bar until her knuckles went white. The true cost of her actions always came later, and it always came with full power. 215 faces now. 12 new ghosts for 3 in the morning. Decker appeared next to her without a sound. He stood beside her, understanding that some quiet moments should be shared, not interrupted. He put 2 glasses on the bar, poured whiskey into them, and slid one to her. I know you do not drink, he said, but tonight we will make a toast. She held the glass and looked into the amber liquid. She saw rifle flashes and 32 soldiers running for their lives from 3 kilometers out. To the 32 who went home to their families, she said quietly, and to the 12 who chose a different path. To Chiwan, my mother, and all the ghosts who bought our peace. To necessary violence, Decker said, and to knowing the right time to stop. They both drank. The whiskey burned her throat but warmed her chest, a feeling she had earned. Decker poured another drink for himself, his eyes looking like he had seen everything twice. You can never truly escape this life, he said. Shadow 6 never gets to retire. She only waits for the next mission. Mara was about to answer, but her secure phone vibrated on the bar. She read the message on the screen, then read it again because it felt unreal. Her blood turned cold. The message said, We know who you are. We know what you did. The dead want their justice. You have 72 hours. She showed the phone to Decker without saying a word. His face turned to stone. The Wagner Group, he said. Payback for Mali. No. Mara's voice was soft but filled with certainty. She was already scrolling through files on her phone. These were secret files she should not have, but she knew how to find them. Do you recall the 60 Taliban fighters in Kandahar? I was ordered to kill them, but I refused. I let them live because they were not a threat anymore. Decker froze. 9 of those men lived. She displayed the intelligence file with their names, photos, and current whereabouts. They were all part of a hidden network that had been active for 2 years. 7 of the men later joined the Islamic State. For the last 2 years, 3 of them have been searching for the American sniper who let them live. She looked up. They were just waiting for a good opportunity. Molly gave them your name, which they never had before. She set the phone on the bar so Decker could read it. I chose to be a person, not a weapon, she said. I did not follow the order. I let them go, and now they are coming to kill me for it. Just then, the door flew open, and the 4 Marines walked in. Roar, Fitch, Bolan, and Neil. They had gotten tired of waiting outside. We know, Roar said. His voice was confident, without the hesitation of 2 nights ago. An Islamic State cell is operating in southern Texas. They are hunting former special operators, especially women, with more than 100 confirmed kills. He looked straight at her. They identified you because of Molly. They are driving to Beaumont now. Mara stared at him. How did you get this information? It came over the Camp Pendleton radio. Fitch has been listening to it. He has been listening since we left here 2 nights ago. Fitch looked like a man who had made a commitment and would not back down. 7 men, 2 cars. They were last seen 8 hours from here, and they are on their way. He took a breath. Ma'am, these men are serious. They are trained fighters who know about this bar, Decker, and your daily schedule. Mara reached under the bar and took out her rifle case. It had already been cleaned and returned to her. She opened it, removed the rifle, and checked the weapon with her left hand. Her right arm was still in a sling, her shoulder a constant pain she would deal with later. She looked at the small team that had gathered around her in just 48 hours. There was Decker, 68 years old with a weak knee and sure hands, who had fought in Ramadi in 2004 and was ready to fight in Beaumont today. Roar, Fitch, Bolan, and Neil, 4 Marines who had come in as troublemakers and had turned into allies. 72 hours, she said. We will use all of it. We are going to turn this bar into a fortress. We will make them regret bringing their fight to our home. Decker came out from behind the bar, moving with the quiet purpose of a man who had made a choice. He opened a cabinet and removed an M4 rifle he had kept spotless for 30 years, always suspecting a day like this would come. My bar, he said simply. My town. My people. He racked the slide. If they want a war, we will give them one they will never forget. Roar looked at his fellow Marines. A quiet understanding passed between them. He then turned back to Mara, his face set with determination. You taught us a lesson 2 nights ago. You said respect is earned with actions. He stood up straighter. Now it is our turn to earn it. Mara looked at the wall of photos behind the bar. It was filled with service members who had been here before, leaving a part of their story behind. Her eyes found the picture from Ramadi. Her mother's face was blurred, but she held a rifle like it was part of her. Mara thought of the letter in her vest, which rested near her heart. It was a message sent across 18 years from a mother who never knew her, but understood her completely. The hardest shot is the one you do not take. She finally understood both parts of that lesson now, when to hold back and when to stand your ground. Her mother had done both in Ramadi in 2004. She paid a price for it, but she passed the knowledge on. Mara lifted her rifle. Her left hand was steady, the sling holding the weapon so naturally it felt like it belonged there. 7 men are coming to kill me because I showed them compassion in Kandahar, she said. Her voice was quiet and certain, completely without drama. They decided my mercy was a weakness. They think the woman who spared them is an easy target they can now hunt and destroy. She chambered around. They are about to learn the difference between mercy and weakness. Outside, the town of Beaumont carried on. It was just an ordinary Wednesday morning, totally unaware of the storm brewing inside a local bar. Cars passed by. People went to work. The world continued its steady rhythm. But inside the Crossroads Tavern, a group of warriors was preparing for a battle that 7 men would bitterly regret starting. The next 72 hours vanished. It was that strange sensation when time accelerates, because experts are using every available second. They knew that preparation was the only element they could fully control, and they intended to manage every single detail. Mara only got 4 hours of sleep the first night, and it was not by choice. Decker blocked the doorway to the back room, telling her that a tired sniper is just an expensive liability. He spoke like a man who had learned that lesson the hard way, in some forgotten place. Her respect for him was too great to argue. She used the rest of her time with intense focus and zero wasted motion. She and Fitch studied every possible route to the Crossroads Tavern. He saw battlefields in ordinary places, the same way she did. They mapped out every line of fire from every possible vantage point. They identified which locations offered true protection and which were merely an illusion of safety. They established fallback positions and communication signals, building that unique, unspoken language that grows between people bracing for a fight. They learned to trust each other's instincts without needing a single word. Once the alcohol and ego were gone, Roar became the leader his rank implied. He was calm and reliable. You only needed to tell him something one time, and he never bothered with useless questions. He positioned Bolan and Neil to guard the rear, and he rehearsed the communication plan with them until it was second nature. Each morning, Decker cleaned his M4 rifle at the bar with the same ritual other men reserve for coffee. He worked in silence, with meticulous care, like someone who had waited 30 years for a valid reason to use that weapon and had finally gotten one. On the second evening, a call came from Okafor. Mara took it in the back room and closed the door. "I have new intelligence," Okafor said, her voice crisp and all business. "We have confirmed the identities of all 7 men. They were Taliban, but now they are with the Islamic State. They spent 2 years organizing this mission to come after you. They have your picture, your old homes, Decker's complete file, and they know you are in Beaumont." "I know," Mara answered. Fitch had most of that figured out 12 hours ago. A moment of silence passed. Of course he did. Another brief pause. "Mara, the command can extract you. We can offer a safe house, a new identity, a complete relocation. You do not need to stay in Beaumont and fight them." Mara glanced at the closed door. From the other side, she could hear Decker moving around behind the bar. He was the man who had given her a safe harbor and had never asked for anything in return. She could hear Roar's calm voice guiding Neil through the communication plan one more time. He sounded so different from the arrogant man who had filled the room with pride and whiskey just 3 nights earlier. "This is my home," she said. "These are my people. I am staying. These 7 are trained killers, Mara. This will not be a sniper shot from 2,000 meters. This is going to be a close quarters battle, in your territory, against men who are only here for you." "Good," she replied. "Men driven by revenge make emotional decisions, not smart ones. Emotional decisions create patterns, and I know how to break patterns." There was a long silence on the phone. "You sound exactly like your mother," Okafor finally said. Mara could feel the old letter resting against her skin. It was still there, tucked into the tactical vest she had not taken off in 3 days. Removing it felt like letting go of something vital she was not ready to set down. "I will consider that a compliment," she said, before ending the call. The 7 men arrived 20 minutes before sunrise on the 3rd day. They did not approach from a single direction. She and Fitch had anticipated that, and they were ready for it. The attackers used 2 vehicles and 3 different entry routes, with synchronized timing, designed to overwhelm any defense. But they failed to account for one critical factor: Mara. She was already in position outside when the first car stopped at the end of the block. She had been waiting for 40 minutes, from a spot that provided a perfect view of both approaches. She held her rifle with her left hand, the sling compensating for the right arm she could hardly move. Bolan had rebandaged her shoulder. It turned out he had emergency medical skills he never mentioned because no one had ever asked. The wrap could not fix the injury, but it would give her the support she needed for the next hour. The first two enemies slipped into the alley next to the tavern. Roar and Bolan were there to meet them. What followed was swift and brutal, completely unlike the choreographed fights in the movies. In truth, the entire encounter was loud for about 40 seconds, and then it was over. Two men who had spent 2 years planning their revenge learned in their last moments that they had chosen the wrong place, a place protected by people who knew it much better than they ever could. Mara heard it happen over her earpiece. Roar's voice was steady and clear. 2 down. The east side is secure. She was already shifting her focus to the second car. 3 of the remaining 5 attackers attempted to come through the front entrance. She dropped the first one from 60 meters away before he ever touched the building. The second one fell at 40 meters. The third managed to reach the door, only to find Decker waiting for him. Decker was 68 years old, had a sore knee, and was holding an M4 rifle he had kept immaculate for 30 years. He was perfectly composed, like a man who had seen true evil in Ramadi and understood that it would not be the last time he had to make a stand. 2 precise shots. Clean and absolute. My bar, Decker whispered to himself. My town. The final 2 attackers had separated and were moving to the north. It was the most intelligent tactical choice they could have made, which was exactly why Mara was already there waiting. One of them froze when he saw her. He was a young man, probably in his late 20s. His face showed the confusion of someone who had invested 2 years of his life into a single mission, only to see it completely unravel. She could see him processing his options. She also saw the exact moment he realized the distance between them gave him no way out. It is finished, she said, and her tone was not a suggestion. He made a move. It was a fatal mistake. She fired, left-handed, before he could complete the action. The 7th and final man stood just behind him. Unlike the others, he stopped cold. He let his weapon fall, raised his hands so she could see them, and dropped to his knees in the dust of the Texas parking lot on that Thursday morning. He looked like a man who had just discovered a shocking new truth, that he was going to live. Mara kept her rifle on him for a long moment. Her left arm was screaming from the weapon's weight, and her right shoulder throbbed with a familiar pain she had ignored for 3 days. You came here because I let your comrades live in Kandahar, she stated. You hunted me for 2 years because I chose to see you as human beings instead of simple targets. He stayed quiet. That decision earned me a court-martial and cost me 6 years of my career. It took more from me than you will ever understand. Her voice remained absolutely firm. And I would make the same choice again tomorrow. She lowered her rifle by about 3 inches. It was not a gesture of surrender. It was just enough to demonstrate the line between a battle and an execution. It was the same 3 inches her mother had offered in Ramadi in 2004. The same 3 inches she had offered in Kandahar in 2022. Both times, that tiny act of grace had almost cost them everything. The most difficult shot, she said softly, is the one you choose not to take. She heard Fitch's voice in her ear. Local police are 2 minutes out. We placed the call 60 seconds ago. She looked at the man kneeling in front of her. You are finished. This is done. What comes next is not up to me. She stepped back, rifle still at the ready, but holding that 3-inch margin. It was not a sign of weakness. It was the entire reason she was there. When the police arrived, they discovered 1 man ready to surrender and 6 others who had chosen a different fate. Inside the Beaumont Tavern, they found a small group of defenders who had protected their territory and were still on their feet. Okafor arrived 3 hours later with Thorne and a federal anti-terrorism team. They managed the scene with the quiet competence of people who had done this many times before. She found Mara behind the bar, cleaning the counter with a rag in slow, deliberate circles. Okafor took a seat across from her and was silent for a while. 6 deceased, 1 in custody. she said at last. Decker is making his report. The 4 Marines will need to do the same. The legal department is handling every detail. She paused for a moment. Everything will be all right. I know, Mara replied. Command is discussing reinstatement. They are offering your full clearance and a return to active duty. The court-martial will be completely erased from your record. Thorne has been pushing for this for the last 2 months. Mara set her glass on the bar. She stared at it, then down at her own hands. The shaking was gone. It stopped the second the fight began, but the burden was still there. The count was now 222, including tonight's events. That was 222 faces that would appear in her mind at 3 in the morning for the rest of her life. The burden and the shaking were not the same. She had figured out how to bear one without succumbing to the other. She raised her eyes to meet Okafor's. I need you to be completely honest with me. Have I ever been anything else? If I return, if I wear that uniform and go back to my duties, is it possible for me to also just be Mara Calloway? Can I still serve drinks, get a sore knee someday, and just sit in a tavern with the people I love? Okafor remained quiet for a very long time. Her silence formed the answer before she even said a word. I believe Shadow 6 and Mara Calloway merged into one person somewhere over the Atlantic. I believe you have been a single person for much longer than you are willing to accept. Roar walked over to the end of the bar. A fresh bruise marked his cheek from the confrontation in the alley. He had the expression of a man who just discovered something essential about himself and was at peace with it. Ma'am, he began, if it means anything, seeing you in action tonight, what you did out there in the parking lot at the very end. He stopped, trying to find the proper words. You had a perfect shot. You made the choice not to take it. That was the most remarkable thing I have ever witnessed. Mara looked from him to the challenge coin she had passed to him 3 nights before. She could see its outline in his shirt pocket, resting over his chest, in the same way she kept the letter over hers. That is the entire lesson, she said. It took me 2 wars and a letter from a woman who passed away to finally understand it. But that is the point. That is the whole lesson. Decker emerged from the back office, his federal questioning finally done. He moved behind the bar with the quiet assurance of a man reclaiming his own space. He looked over the damage to his bar, glanced at the people inside, and then his eyes settled on Mara. This place is going to need some work, he stated. But the bar is still standing, she responded. He poured 2 glasses and set one down for her. This time, she accepted it without any hesitation. Some toasts must be earned, and this was certainly one of them. To Dana Calloway, Decker said. His voice was heavy with 18 years of debt, appreciation, and grief he had held since Ramadi. To Shadow 1, who defended 9 rooftops, who wrote a letter, and who sent it forward through 2 wars to a daughter she was never able to meet. Mara's hand was perfectly steady as she lifted her glass. To Dana Calloway, she echoed, who showed me that the most difficult shot is the one you refuse to take, and that understanding the line between a fight and an execution is the only thing that matters. She looked at the photograph on the wall, at her mother's concealed face behind the scope in Ramadi. She was the woman who held the position, made the ultimate sacrifice, and still managed to pass her lesson on, trusting it would one day reach its destination, and it finally had. She took a sip. Outside, the town of Beaumont was beginning an ordinary Thursday. The people living there had no clue that a hidden war had been waged on their streets as they slept. A war confronted by a 22-year-old woman with dark hair, a white sports bra, and a history of 222 confirmed kills. She also carried a letter folded over her heart that had journeyed through 18 years and 2 conflicts just to tell her who she was meant to be. Shadow 6 was never simply a call sign. It was not a number, a secret document, or a tattoo from 5 deployments. It was a decision she made over and over, in the shadows, under enemy fire, at unbelievable ranges, knowing the full price and being willing to pay it. Mara Calloway had tried to walk away from that choice, but that choice refused to walk away from her. As she stood behind the bar at the Crossroads Tavern on a Thursday morning in Beaumont, Texas, with a steady hand and her mother's letter near her heart, with 32 soldiers still breathing, and a little girl named Molly, who would never know her name, she at last understood. It would always be a part of her. Some individuals are simply made to handle the kind of weight that would break anyone else, not because they do not feel its heaviness, but because they decide to carry it regardless of the cost. With every day, every assignment, every shot they fire, and every single shot they hold back. With every new face that is added to the gallery that visits at 3 a.m. That was the meaning of Shadow 6. That is who she was all along, and the world, which keeps a long record of the heroes it desperately needs, already knew precisely where she could be found. Model.